Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Cruising to the Void. My name's Fish, and this week, here's what we got. We're going to talk about why the game of women's lacrosse should be ended, left where it's at. The game of women's lacrosse should evolve and be playing the same game as the men. I believe that there is no need for the women's particular rule set in the game of field lacrosse anymore, and I think it's time that we lay it to bed. Today, we're going to go over why. What we do have is I'm going to make this argument for the game of field lacrosse specifically because we do have, shout out to women's box lacrosse, which plays with pretty much the same rule set as the men. In lower levels, they have different rules on body checking, cross checking, crease checks allowed, crease dives are allowed, so on and so forth. But I mean, these are also the same rule sets that we adapt to little kids, right? Like we adapt these to U8, U10, U12. Like we know when to introduce specific rule sets and grow the game, and it's easy to transfer that over. But shout out to Colorado Lacrosse League, shout out to a bunch of Canadian lacrosse leagues and pro women's box lacrosse, because you guys are playing with the same rule set, absolutely setting the standard right now. And I think if we played the same rule set in field and if we played contact in field, it's a phenomenal opportunity for the game of women's lacrosse under its current rule set and allow women to play the same game as the men. I think this is a phenomenal time to do this and make this drastic move forward and evolve in the game of women's lacrosse. First things first, let's kind of run back the history of women's lacrosse. The initial rule set was written in 1890, and they played that rule set. And the modern rules of lacrosse, we're not going to go over the older ones, but the modern rules of lacrosse, women's lacrosse as we know it, is the rule set adapted in the 1930s. That's with the five midfielders, the moved further back fields, the non-contact shallower pockets, just kind of as you know the modern game. That's when that rule set was adapted. Now, obviously, over time, rules have changed, but the modern game, I'd say, as we know it, was the rule set adapted in the 30s. So, with that, we also believe that women were very different athletes to men in that time frame. And that's where that rule set in particular came from and got pushed upon. And now as we've grown as a society, women have more rights, they have more equality, and we've seen that even rise in sports, especially within athletes. Female athletes have proven that they are pushing their bodies to the same capacities that men are. And just some of the world record times tell you that. Currently here in perspective, let's just look at swimming. In 1930, Helen Madison's world record for the freestyle was 1 minute and 8 seconds. The current world record for the women's 100-meter freestyle is 51 seconds, 51.71. The male's world record is 46. So the women have closed that gap astronomically since that sport has been introduced and shown that they can do everything that we can do functionally. Just as we know, genetically, there are distributions, cross-sectional areas that change, and men are a little bit bigger, so on and so forth, that affect these times and scores. But if you look at the pure athleticism and capability, women can do everything that men can. They can train the same way, and they can play the same games. And we had a very different mindset in the 1930s when this rule set was written, and I think we've proven that out of the time frame moving forward in the modern era, and seeing the numbers that women are putting up, and also women's athletes just growing in general. If you were to say, hey, who are the greatest tennis players of all time, and you don't include Serena Williams in that conversation, you're mental. You're not paying attention to any of the numbers or anything that's on paper. So those are just a few examples, and you can play that game in every sport at this point. And I think this is an opportunity for lacrosse to grow in that same aspect of, if we adapt the same rule sets, we can have our stars grow bigger. But either way, circling through the history of time, we viewed women's sports in a very different mindset at that point in time. We viewed them as very dainty. Women couldn't do what men could do. Women can't get hit, they can't get touched. So we developed rule sets for them. Now, times have changed, and I think it's an opportunity for us to adapt to that. Next, let's talk about actual injury. Because if you either way think that men and women still aren't equal, we can talk purely injuries in the game of lacrosse. Now, men's lacrosse, we're going to talk everything in per 1,000 athletes. So currently, men's lacrosse has roughly 6.52 injury rate per 1,000 athletes. And women's lacrosse has 5.19. Now, the injury rate is higher in men's lacrosse, but the injury distribution is way more vast. Okay? Talk about that. There's more contact in men's lacrosse, so you can have a wider variety of injuries that are going to come about that aren't going to necessarily happen in women's lacrosse. That's going to up that total injury rate. Specifically, I want to talk about concussion rates in head and facial injuries. So in women's lacrosse, current concussion, well, let's back this up. In men's lacrosse, current concussions per 1,000 injuries is 0.91. So less than one of those injuries in every 1,000 is a concussion in men's, or of those 1,000 you guys get it. Of the 1,000 injuries that were to happen, 0.91, so less than one of them is a concussion in men's lacrosse, which is very important to note. In women's lacrosse, it is currently 1.28 per 1,000. So there are more concussions in women's lacrosse. And now the number isn't greater, but I think we have a huge opportunity here to bring that number down for women just by wearing helmets and changing the rule set. Because I think, let me finish the rest of this. I'll continue with the statement. So let's talk about head and facial injuries. So of your injuries that happen to men, 3 to 3.5% of them are head or facial injuries. So either a concussion or a cut or any sort of head type of trauma injury that pulls them off to the sideline. In women, it's 14 to 20%. So 10 to 15% higher are facial and head injuries in women's lacrosse. And we can all agree that concussions are very avoidable in a lot of sports. We've done a lot to update modern rule sets to get rid of concussions. And I think by just having women not wear helmets, we are exposing them to these injuries and opening up something that we can very easily avoid just by changing the rule set. Now, I think a lot of this also has to come with the rule set in women's lacrosse versus men's lacrosse. In women's lacrosse, you can check the stick, but you cannot check on somebody's hands. So oftentimes when women are cradling, the stick is up higher, and they're getting checked on the head of the stick, which is near their face. And if somebody were to miss that, then they get cracked in the head by their stick, which is generally a hard composite plastic, which is just cracking you in the head, and they're hitting it hard enough to try to whack the ball out. So that's where I think a lot of injuries are coming from that can be very easily avoided just by changing the rule set. Because in men's lacrosse, at younger levels, you see the injuries because guys are checking towards the head of the stick a lot more. As the game elevates, a lot less guys are checking towards the heads of the stick and checking on hands in the butt end of the stick, which just based on that rule set alone removes the idea of me hitting my stick towards your head so much less than in women's lacrosse, just simply on the rule set, because I'm aiming for a different target because I have a higher reward benefit of that. And I think that just some of those simple rule changes could adapt. And at that point, if we're changing to adapt to get rid of concussions in women's lacrosse, you are now wearing helmets and gloves, and you might as well be playing the same game that we're playing, because at that point, you're only missing shoulder pads and elbow pads. And even in men's lacrosse, 70% of us don't wear shoulder pads unless it's required in the rules. We just wear elbows and gloves because we're not hitting each other drastically as much at the higher levels. You're not getting whacked in the shoulder as much with the stick. Again, back to where our reward benefit is. You have a drastically higher reward getting on somebody's bottom hand than you do hitting up on the head of their stick where they're going to be moving it around all the time. So just alone changing the rule set, we can change how women are getting injured, and we can also protect them, because we all know concussions are bad, and this current rule set is not helping them in that aspect, where we already have a tried and true tested rule set on paper that they can adapt tomorrow if they chose to. Next, let's talk about the growth potential. An analogy or another sport we're going to look to compare us is going to be wrestling, which is a contact sport. And from a NFHS report, okay, so this is the high school federation. Girls' participation from 2021 to 2022 to 2023 to 2024 grew 102%. So with that, as they are welcoming more women into wrestling, we are seeing it grow astronomically. It went from 31,000 total participants to 64,000 participants. Now, at the same time, here's what's awesome. Boys wrestling grew an additional 25%. This brings in the idea that wrestling homes now can bring boys and girls to the same practice. They can do the same activities. You don't have to drop one off, run away, go do something else, so on and so forth. All the games that come with different practices, and you can be a sport household, which makes it easier for a lot of parents. Now, if we talk about this in women's lacrosse, the idea that I can just pass my kids' gear down from Jimmy to Sally to Ben back down to Kristen, and going through the list and everybody can wear the same gear is phenomenal. Parents would love that. It would make everybody so happy. It would also reduce the SKUs for vendors of lacrosse vendors and give them the opportunity to focus more on individual product development, because right now, by having two different rule sets, I feel that we are hindering the R&D of the game, because we have to go down two separate avenues as opposed to going down one avenue that unifies us all together and grows the game and makes us bigger, faster, and stronger. Because one thing that you're even starting to see is women are using very similar mesh to men now. The armor mesh is starting to carry over a lot, and you see that in both games. So even the mesh is starting to adapt to the games. I think this is a time for us to grow. Now, also, with that, the households can now go to the same practices, right? It also allows crossover knowledge. So somebody like myself who knows the game of men's lacrosse, I can go over and help coach women's lacrosse while it's growing. It's very easy for me to cover both of those. Or vice versa, if there is a woman that knows this game better than me, drastically come onto our team and teach me about it. I'm welcome to have you. If you know the same game that we do, let's work together to grow it. You will also see women probably taking more roles in the major leagues at the games. Maybe not necessarily at a player level. I don't want to argue that men and women should be playing together, but at youth levels, they can definitely play together. And at higher levels, you're going to see a lot of cross work between the two. So if you have we do have a men's and a women's pro league, but you could see very easily women coaching men and men coaching women on both sides, because it's the same game and we're working together and it's all growing. I think that's a phenomenal opportunity for general managers that just know players and understand the games to grow. I think there's a lot of opportunities in just everything around it that comes by merging the two rule sets together. Now, let's also talk about some other sports that have seen rules pushed together and great growth from it. We recently allowed rugby in the Olympics, and I think this Summer Olympics, there was not a single U.S. rugby player that grew more than Alona Mar. Alona Mar had the same rule set, the same stage, and the same opportunities as every one of those men under the exact same rule set and absolutely demolished it. She took everybody on the field, made them her bitch, and then got on ESPN's highlight reel on top of marketing herself and used the same stage and absolutely dumpstered everybody. And I think that is phenomenal. And if we were to do this in lacrosse, we would open up those avenues and lanes for us as a sport and as a community, which I think would be phenomenal. And I think Alona set the template for everybody to go do it, especially with lacrosse coming up in the Olympics in the next cycle. I think sixes is a big step. Sixes is following the same numbers wise and same rule set as in scoring, in field dimensions in men's and women's. But I think it's an opportunity for us to bring in contact. I think it's a time for women to put on the pads and start playing a contact sport. Not start playing a contact sport, you know what I mean. Start playing the contact version of the sport. Because I think women need more contact sports. I think this is an opportunity for growth in women's sports as well. Because one thing I think we are going to also see is with this initial transfer over and growth of the game, you're going to see women who already have better stick skills than men. We can very easily argue that most women in the game have better stick skills just because of the nature of how the games are set up. Once they start to learn some of our adaptations that we make, carrying the stick one-handed, cradling, adapting to bottom hand checks, adapting to hand checks in general, you're going to see them out-finesse us constantly. And that will make skyrocket in social media. That will skyrocket in ESPN. That will be outplaying and grow the game for everybody together. I think there's going to be a few seasons or maybe even a year or two where we're going to see a lot of contact, a lot of hits, because it's just going to be adapting to the game. But then once they figure out that they have a lot better stick skills than us, they can move the ball faster and quicker because they already know how to from their game. Dude, it's going to unlock opportunities for everybody to grow. And I think this is a great way to be accepting of it as men as well. Now, same thing is if they are playing the same game, you have the same game growing outside. Men and women can do drills together at the high school level, at the college level, at insert all your favorite levels of it. And I think it also opens up the opportunity for co-ed sports more. So if we have co-ed lacrosse leagues where contact rules that we just use for kids, right? We know how to play that game. You know how to make a shorter contact of scrimmage. we know how to adapt this appropriately and even almost open up co-ed rule sets for the game to grow together. So I think with all of that, it's time for the women's game of lacrosse to, with the modern rule set, we're going to be looking at a century in 2031. I think as a century gift to themselves, the game of women's lacrosse should unify rule set, say, and grow together. I think this is a phenomenal opportunity for everyone to grow, be more accepting of each other, and the more commonality that we share, the more we can come together and have conversations and grow together. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Cruising to the Void. Thank you for listening. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, your favorite listening app, Amazon Music, and leave us a like, comment, and every week we're going to be on here, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Tune in.